My cat keeps rubbing up against my tripod. Cece, I'm sorry, you gotta go. Hey guys, welcome to another video. Which video, you ask? That's a good question. My name is Ian, I'm Ian the Reader, and today I'm gonna be talking to you guys about my 5 current favorite fantasy series. Woohoo! I'm so excited about this video. So this is a video that I have been thinking about making for a little while. I just wanted to wait until it was like the right time, and January feels like the right time because my plan is with this video to make it every year. And so every January at some point in the month, I will make a current favorite fantasy series. And it'll be like top 5, I'm thinking. 5 feels right. I thought about doing 10, but I wanted to really narrow it down. And so yeah, it's one of those things where I definitely feel like my favorite fantasy series will change throughout the years, and I read a lot of fantasy every year. It was like over a third of what I read last year. And so I definitely see myself finding a lot of new fantasy favorites every year. And so I think that it will be interesting for me to kind of track throughout the years where my fantasy favorites kind of lie. I think it'll also be really interesting just to see which books and which series like stick around for years and which books kind of fall out of favor. Not necessarily like out of favor, because I think once I've loved a book, I really will love it at this point in my life. But really which books are like all-time favorites and which ones are just favorites for a season and then are replaced by some other book or series. So, before we get started, a few rules and stipulations, if you will, to the criteria I'm looking at in regard to this video. So obviously I'm not going to talk about books that only have like one book out in the series so far, just because that doesn't really seem fair. And I'm also not going to talk about book series where I've only read one book in the series and there are other ones out, just again because my tastes and opinions change throughout series. I either fall madly in love with the series even more, or, you know, I'm less interested. And so it doesn't really seem right to talk about book series that I've only read one in. So that disqualifies a lot because I am a sampler when it comes to fantasy series a lot of times, where I'll be like, oh, I've got to try the series, and I'll read the first book and I'll be like, that was so good, can't wait to continue on, and then like 2 years later I've still only read the first book. So which is like interesting because I thought this list was going to be really hard to make, and don't get me wrong, it was hard, especially like ranking in the top 5, but it was not as hard as I thought it was going to be, which is very eye-opening to me that I really need to like commit with series more, get past like the second book, man. I suck. That's the moral of the story. Been like fully. So what I'm looking at with these book series is that I have to either be caught up on them if it's like a short series, or if it's a longer series, I have to have read at least 50% of the books that are published. All right, so we're about to jump into my top 5, but before that, let's talk tea. This is like one of my favorite mugs. It just says heck yes, which is like one of my favorite phrases. If you know me in real life, or if you just watch my videos, you'll hear me say like heck yeah or stuff like that a lot, just because that's who I am. And so yeah, I love this mug, and this is a heck yes kind of video, to be honest, because I'm talking about one of my favorite genres and some of my favorite books and series of all time and favorite authors. So yes, and the tea I'm drinking today is vanilla bean macaron. Okay, I never know if it's macaron or like macaroon, to be honest, and I don't care that much, but you tell me, which is it? If I was to look at the way it was spelled, it would be macaron, but I hear macaroon a lot. Is it a Texas thing where we say it wrong? I don't know, somebody help me. But anyway, this tea's really good. It's Tazo brand, and I really like it, and I'm just so into teas lately, so I thought I would continue talking about teas because I like it. It's nice. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Coming in at number 5 is a series that I felt that I really had to mention, just because one, it was so foundational in my fantasy reading experience. It's the first fantasy series that I ever read on my own, and it's a series that was very foundational in my life as a reader, and one that obviously has been foundational to fantasy in general, and that is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have a hard time ever imagining myself not putting it in the top 5, and right now it is at number 5 just because it has been a long time since I've actually read this series, and the other series I'm talking about are a bit more fresh in my mind. I read this series, okay, wait. Let me tell you a funny story, because I've wanted to tell this story for a little while, and this is the perfect time to talk about it. My dad and my aunt are like super nerds, okay? But I love them to death, obviously, but when I was growing up, they loved The Lord of the Rings. They read them all the time, they loved the movies and things like that, and I was a kid, and I was like, oh, I want to watch Lord of the Rings, and my dad said, you can watch Lord of the Rings if you read the books, and if you pass a test on them. And he was totally serious. Like, I don't know if he was actually serious in the moment, but I, being the like super stubborn child that I was like, fine, I'm gonna do it. And so I was like 11 years old, maybe 12, and I read all of the Lord of the Rings books. And he and my aunt, my dad and my aunt, made a test on the Lord of the Rings. It was 100 questions. There was an essay portion. There was an essay portion, and there were bonus questions about The Hobbit and bonus questions about Elven. No, actually, they weren't even bonus questions. They were just in the test about Elven, like, spelling of things. Like, I had to spell Elven words correctly, and, like, I mean, is there anything nerdier than that? I don't think so. But I got an A on the I got an A on the test. And so I was 12, and I wasn't allowed to watch PG-13 movies, but I was 12, and I was allowed to watch Lord of the Rings because I read them and passed the daggum test. So there you go. But anyway, like I was saying, this series has just been so foundational for me as a reader. It's one that I cherish and I love watching the movies, and I've been slowly re-listening to this series on audiobook, and Andy Serkis does a great job. And I mean, there's just nothing like this trilogy. You know, it's the fantasy trilogy that changed fantasy, that changed literature, and so, I mean, I gotta give props where they're due. Coming in at number 4 is one that I kind of had a toss-up on, because I didn't want to include 2 series by this author, and you probably already know who it is, but it was hard for me to decide between his 2 most popular series. However, I did end up going with Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson over the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, and this might be a bit of a hot take, and I don't know necessarily that I will stand by this forever, because 1, I've only read the first 3 books of the Stormlight Archive. I have not read Oathbringer yet, and then in addition to that, I've just read a lot more of Mistborn, because I'm fully caught up on Mistborn, which means I have read 6 of the books for it. And it's one of those that I just think about it all the time, and I love the way that Mistborn Era 1 and Era 2 are so different, but like they feel like a natural progression of the world, and it feels like Brandon Sanderson really just took his creativity to a next level. And I love the characters, and I love the decisions that he made in the conclusion of the first era and how that affects Era 2. I think the series is so brilliant. I love the characters. I love the magic system. I could talk about Mistborn all day, and it's really what like reignited my passion for fantasy. I read this back in like 2016 or 2017, and after that I was just like, I gotta have more fantasy. So, you know, The Lord of the Rings really started my reading journey as a reader in general when I was young, and then when I was an adult, Mistborn is what really got me like so hungry for fantasy. I love it. Tea break. It's good. It's real good. Okay, number 3 is one. Okay, this is where it starts to get really hard, and it's funny because this is just a very, very similar situation to one that I was in like 2 weeks ago, when I was trying to make my best reads of 2021, because my number 3 is, even now I'm struggling, my number 3 is The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. This trilogy is amazing, and like pretty much perfect, and yeah, like the best trilogy I've ever read. It is unbelievably powerful, and it's incredible just to watch the progression of the characters that you follow. So this is one, like, if you haven't heard about this just follows this generation of this family that is the head of this clan, almost like a gang of sorts, that runs like this operation around Jade, that is a stone that enables people to have powers and yada da da da. But it's really not about that, you know. It is and it isn't, but it's really about this generation that is rising up and trying to gain power and trying to gain credibility, you know, in a world where their ancestors and the previous generation before them left such a mark on their family and on the society they live in, and so they're trying to live up to that and really kind of figure out who they are in the roles that they have been pushed into, whether they wanted to be in those roles or not. And I just love the story of this family. Like, really, that's the thing that sells this for me, because yes, there's political stuff that's really interesting. Yes, there are twists that are unbelievable and things like that, but it's really just the family and their dynamics together. It focuses on 3 siblings and a cousin of theirs who's also kind of like an honorary 4th sibling. And I just haven't read a fantasy series that nails the family dynamic as much as this series does, and I was blown away by the scope of the character arcs, really. Not really the scope of the story itself, because like I said, it just follows this one generation of a family in this vast history of a family and of the society, but really just like the close examination of the family dynamics and really the personal journey that these people go on as they try to find themselves in this role and in this clan It was just amazing, and I love this trilogy. I could talk about Jade Legacy and the other 2 books on and on and on, but yeah, this had to be my top 5. It was really hard not putting it higher, but I think my number 2 and my number 1 belong where they do. Which brings me to my number 2, and it's funny because like I put this on the same level with the Greenbone Saga, but I really do go so back and forth. But my number 2 favorite fantasy series of all time is The Realm of the Elderling by Robin Hobb. Now, I still haven't read Assassin's Fate, so I've read 15 out of 16 of these books, but I know that Assassin's Fate is going to be perfect. Like, I just know it. There's no way I will not love that book. I'm scared. I'm very, very scared to read Assassin's Fate, but this series has the best character work that I've ever read. Fitz and the Fool and so many other characters are just incredibly well crafted and incredibly complex and incredibly deep. And it's one of those things where Fitz just feels like somebody you know so deeply. He almost feels like a best friend that you've had since you were a child, because you get to follow him from when he was like 6 years old to when he's an old man. And so yeah, you feel like you're on that journey with him, and you see him in so many stages of making a lot of mistakes and not knowing what the heck he's doing and not really being confident in himself, to being on the exact opposite end. And it's just amazing. And I love the way that Robin Hobb really like lays a lot of groundwork that pays off sometimes like 10 books later. She is the definition of the long haul when it comes to fantasy, in my opinion, just because her books are not very fast-paced. They're definitely not action-based. It's one of those things where like it follows an assassin, but it's more of like an undercover assassin who like his methods might be like poisoning somebody rather than like sneaking into somebody's like room in a castle and stabbing them and then running away. It's not like one of those kind of things. It's not action-packed, but man, does it leave an emotional imprint upon everybody who reads it. I mean, anytime anybody talks about this series, once they get like past the first book is kind of emotional, but like second book on, you're just like destroyed every other page. And so if a series can do that and get you so emotionally invested in a series, one, enough to read 15 or 16 books, but also just to continuously come back to something that hurts you so badly over and over again, it just deserves all the praise that I can give it. And so yeah, that's my number 2. Now my number 1 is one that it's one of those where like I know that it's me. Like I would absolutely not say that it is as well written or intricate or progressive, I guess, as maybe any of the other fantasy series that I've mentioned in this. However, this is my favorite series to read, to reread, to talk about, to think about, to brainstorm and predict like what's going to happen in the next books. And it is a series that I just see myself reading over and over and over again for many years to come, and that is the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. This is a series that is like a magic trick almost, because like you kind of enter into it skeptical. You're like, I don't know if this is gonna work for me. I don't know if I'm gonna really buy into what's going on here. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you think you know what's going on, and then you're not 20 books in, because there's not 20 books, but like you're 10, 12 books in, and you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? How did this happen? What happened to me? This was not part of the plan. And that was really my reading experience with the Dresden Files, because I read the first book, Stormfront, at the very end of 2019, and I was like, okay, that was fine. It was pretty good. And so in January of 2020, I picked up the second book. I was like, that was fine too. And then I read the third book. And I was like, oh, that was garbage. I'm done. And then I just watched a lot of videos that were like, keep trying a little bit longer. And I was like, okay, fine. You know what? What's one more book? And then I did not stop reading these books for months. Like literally, I read like 4 a month for a while until I was caught up, which is very strange for me, because I'm very much, like I said earlier, somebody who like has an experience with the book. I'll read the first book and I'll be like, oh, that was good, I'll come back to this later. I'm not much of a binger, to be honest, when it comes to series. But the Dresden Files was like, it's like that bag of chips. You can't just have one. It was like, oh, I'll have that, and then I'll have another, and then another. And then before I knew it, I was caught up on this like 17 book series, and I loved it so much. And it's one of those that I constantly come back to. kind of just pick up a random book whenever I feel like. And now that I've read all of them, like the other day, I didn't know what to listen to, so I randomly picked up Proven Guilty, the 8th book, even though I haven't reread book 3 through 7 yet. But it's one of those that, like I said, I could just talk for hours and hours about. And luckily, after I read this and got obsessed with it, I got my little brother to read it, then I got my dad to read it, and then I got my older brother to read it. And my goal is to get my wife to read it, and just literally anybody. You know, I like I said, I could talk about Dresden Files for hours and hours and hours, and I have, because now that I have my family to talk to about it, like, I feel like that's half of what we talk about anytime we get together, is just talking about Dresden Files and wondering about what's going to happen in the next book and things like that. But, I mean, just really Harry Dresden is a character that you kind of don't like at first, in my opinion, just because of some of his character qualities. But the more you know him, it's like you kind of, it's like somebody you love. Like, you can see past the flaws, and you see just how wonderful and genuine of a person they are. And that's what it is with Harry. Like, he's got some dumb things about him, but if you can look past that, you see he's this incredible character that goes through so much, and really just matures a lot, and doesn't mature a lot, but you know, he just goes through a lot, and I really respect that. On top of that, this is just like the most fun I've ever had reading a fantasy series. It is like popcorn most times, but there are also some incredibly emotional moments, some incredibly impactful moments, and I love how, like, Jim Butcher writes some stuff in book 1 and 2 and 3 and stuff like that that doesn't feel important. And then you get to like book 12 and book 13 and 14, and you're like, oh my gosh, I remember this character or this thing or whatever, and you just obsess over it, and it's insane. Come join the Dresden Files cult. We're great. We have cookies and we have tea. So, but that is it. I stand by my list, honestly, for 2021. So this, like I said, is my 2021 favorite fantasy series. The Dresden Files will always have a very special place in my heart, so we'll see if it gets knocked down in 2022, but I would be surprised. But thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what your favorite fantasy series are. You don't have to do a top 5 if you don't want to. If you want to do like a top 3 or just a top 1, I would love to talk to you guys about your favorite fantasy series. And I would love to read some more of like people's favorite fantasy series, because like I said, I'm a dabbler when it comes to fantasy series, but I want to commit. I want to read some series and catch up on some series in 2022, so that's the goal. But again, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos. I post every Tuesday and every Friday, and sometimes on other days if I feel like it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!